Починаємо за хвилину. Дякую.
Мгм.
It's June 7, Ukraine Media Center continues its operation. My name is Vasil Samakhvalov. Joining us online is Oleksandr Krasnolutskyi, First Deputy Minister for Environmental Protection and Natural Resources of Ukraine. Good afternoon, Mr. Oleksandr. Good afternoon, Mr. Oleksandr. The topic which is in the headlines of all the world media is the detonation of Kakhovka hydraulic power plant. What are the actions of the ministry? What does the ministry do in relation of this horrible catastrophe? So first of all, I would like to think that even before the detonation of the dam back in October, Russian terroristic forces detonated one of the waterways there, and we were monitoring the level of water in Kakhovsky water reservoir. The work did not stop, and after the detonation of the dam we continue monitoring the condition of the water reservoir. Through the post of monitoring we collect that information. Another thing, we understand that what happened will result in colossal environmental damage to our ecosystems, and since the moment of detonation, the environmental inspection started working to document the damage on the environment, the damage inflicted on the forest resources, water resources, and national reserves, the destruction of biodiversity, and respectively the damage inflicted on national parks and what we document today in Kherson region is all the damage. Now the heads of departments of the ministry work in the region along with the services and the units of the state forestry inspection and state water inspection. Everybody works on documenting the damage and mitigation of the consequences which is of this catastrophe. We understand that it's a global damage which will result in damage in many areas, but if you may name three most impressive, the biggest kinds of damage which were inflicted by this catastrophe, what would you emphasize? Well, I cannot tell you about the three areas, but talking about the environmental sector which is coordinated by our ministry is the damage to biodiversity. The Kakhovsky water reservoir was a territory which was used for migration of the birds, and the birds were nesting there. After the detonation, the speed of water, we understand that was time of the nesting for the birds. And for the time being, we see that a lot of biodiversity will be destroyed. The territory along which the water is flowing, there were national parks created for preservation of red book animals and plants. The animals and plants are being added to the red book for special protection, and respectively we have to understand what what actually happened to them or to those unique species from the south of Ukraine, whether they will continue existing in Ukraine in general, and also we may talk about the contamination of water resources. Different chemical substances end up in water due to the intense flow, which is another damage to the water resources of Ukraine. Also damaged were the soils because they will be washed out, so we cannot segregate some three specific areas. Is the comprehensive damage to the environment in that area. This is the biggest eco site for the time being in Ukraine since the beginning of the full-scale invasion. Questions from the floor, please. Good afternoon, Maria Shenkorenko, Ukrinform. The law enforcement developed the information notice which says that due to the flooding, the territories of the Emerald Network of Europe ended up underwater. What does it mean for Europe in terms of a transition to European legislation for environmental protection? I would not tie it to the legislation, but the Emerald Network is the territory for nesting and migration of the birds. For Ukraine and for the world, it means the loss of biodiversity because those birds are migrating and their ways of migration is across this Emerald Network. Why is it protected? Because it has special utilization conditions. There is the European Bird Directive which regulates the necessity for preservation of such areas. The water washes those territories away and it may result in the consequences for the whole world. The biodiversity may decrease on a global scale. So getting back to the issue of the damage, it will be measured in money, and so who and using what methods documents this damage, and when will we be able to find out the figures, like in money? How can we measure it? Well, it's measured not only in money but also in the loss of certain species of plants and animals. It's difficult to measure it in money, but talking about money equivalent, the state environmental inspection keeps working. We calculate the damage, but we still have to understand some things. First of all, it's not only the right bank of Ukraine, which is under Ukrainian control, which is flooded, but it's also the left bank, which is under temporary occupation, and we don't have access to that area for the time being. We have to understand that the water keeps flowing, it keeps coming, and the access to certain areas is still unavailable, and the damage respectively cannot be calculated for those areas. And on top of that is the area of active battles with incessant shellings, so it's very difficult to calculate any damage without access to the area. We can make aerial footage, aerial photos of the area, but again we have to take into account those nuances that I've named. So what will be the further steps of the ministry? First of all, I'm talking about the coordination with the international organizations, cooperation with them. With whom is ministry going to talk and about what? So we have a directive by Ruslan Strelets, the minister. We will contact all the biggest government and non-government environmental organizations to condemn the activities of Russia. We will demand to exclude Russia from the environmental conventions, because we see that the country that commits such actions, which inflicts such environmental losses, cannot be or may not be a member to any environmental convention or agreement. Russian Federation should be condemned, and this is what we're working on since yesterday upon the directive of our minister. Do we have any more questions on the floor? Could you please tell us, we mentioned Europe, international partners, but generally, was there any reaction by Europe, the reaction to the detonation and damage on the environment and all those territories that we've just mentioned? Well, I will be only talking about the environmental organizations. Unfortunately, for what we've seen, non-government organizations have not reacted to this situation. This is why we continue submitting requests to condemn the actions of Russian Federation. Thank you. Everything is clear. We know you're quite limited on time. So thanks again. Joining us online was Oleksandr Krasnolutskyi, the first Deputy Minister of Environmental Protection and Natural Resources of Ukraine. And we were talking about the tragedy in Kakhovka hydraulic power plant. See you in less than an hour. And we will talk to Andriy Demchenko about the Ukrainian border. See you shortly.